Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nell Pepper, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore and the Edmond and Lily Safra Center for Ethics, I am so pleased to introduce this virtual event with BO SEO presenting his new book, Good Arguments: How Debate Teaches Us to Listen and Be Heard, in conversation with Derek Thompson. Thank you so much for joining us virtually today. Harvard Bookstore's virtual event series continues alongside our in-person programming, bringing authors and their work to our community, both digitally and in Cambridge. Please check out the full event schedule on our website at harvard.com/events. And while you're there, you can sign up for our email newsletter for more updates and browse our bookshelves from home, or indeed wherever you may be. The Ethics in Your World series, presented with Harvard University's Edmond Lily Safra Center for Ethics, features leading thinkers taking on tough problems that matter to us all. Learn more about the Safra Center at ethics.harvard.edu. This discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk, click on the Q&A button on your screen, and we will get through as many questions as time allows. This event will also have closed captioning available. Depending on the version of Zoom that you are using, you may need to enable captions yourself by clicking on the closed caption button on your screen. Also in the chat, I will be posting a link to purchase copies of Good Arguments from harvard.com. Your purchases make events like today's possible. They help ensure the future of a landmark independent bookstore. We thank you so much for continuing to show up and tune in, both in support of our authors and also of the fantastic staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We all sincerely appreciate your support now and always. Lastly, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings such as these, technical issues may arise. We, of course, hope that they do not, but if they do, we will do our best to resolve them quickly. Thank you so much for your patience and understanding. And now I am delighted to introduce our speakers. BO SEO is a two-time world champion debater and former coach of the Australian national debating team and the Harvard College Debating Union. He has won both the World Schools Debating Championship and the World Universities Debating Championship. And BO has written for the New York Times, The Atlantic, and CNN, and he has worked as a national reporter for the Australian Financial Review and has been a regular panelist on the primetime Australian debate program, The Drum. Derek Thompson is a senior editor at The Atlantic magazine, where he writes about economics and the media. He is a regular contributor to NPR's Here and Now and appears frequently on television, including on CBS and MSNBC. He is the author of Hitmakers: How to Succeed in an Age of Distraction, and hosts the podcast Plain English. Today, they'll be discussing BO SEO's book, Good Arguments: How Debate Teaches Us to Listen and Be Heard. BO takes readers into the eccentric and brilliant subculture of competitive debate while recounting how debate became a way for him to find his voice after emigrating with his family from Korea to Australia, and also to succeed socially and academically. Drawing insights from the strategies, structure, and history of competitive debate, the book shows how to improve communication with friends, family, and colleagues alike. Adam Grant praises this is not just the electrifying tale of how BO SEO won 2 World Debate Championships. It is also a user manual for our polarized world. I'm very pleased to turn things over to our speakers. The digital podium is yours, BO SEO and Derek Thompson.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, Bo. It's great to be able to talk to you. Great to take the digital podium, as it were. This is a fantastic book. I highly recommend it to anyone who is watching either live or on YouTube. One of the real surprises that I had from this book is that, to be totally honest, Bo, I always thought of debaters as being like kind of a bizarre species of talker that they use tools and they manipulated, and it was just a different way of engaging in the art of speaking, a different bizarre way of engaging the art of speaking. And what I learned from this book is that understanding how to be a better debater can make us better at talking, at working out disagreements, at being a better citizen, and just understanding people in the inevitable consequence that we initially misunderstand what the people around us are saying. And maybe just reflect on this particular idea that while there's this sense that debating and talking are two very different things, in fact, being a better debater can make us a better listener and a better talker in our day-to-day lives.
It's a wonderful question, and thank you for your kindness. Let me just start by thanking the Harvard Bookstore for having us. There was a time in my undergraduate years where most of my outgoing expenses went to the used book section of the Harvard Bookstore, and that was not good for my health or my finances or my romantic life, but it was quite formative for who I am today. Thanks to the Safra Center, just been an intellectual home for me and remains one at Harvard. And thanks to you, Derek. One of the things I learned in writing this book is whatever work that you don't do as an author in sharpening and polishing and presenting an idea, that's work that readers are going to have to do to make sense of it. Mm-hmm. And I can think of very few journalists who work harder for their readers and listeners than you do. And as I said to you on the phone, I consider your kindness in being here to be kindness in addition to the generosity you show me as a reader and a listener. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
So you're precisely right that that was the gap that I was trying to write across, right? That idea that debate is an odd subculture, it's a strange activity, that it feels different than the way in which we talk every day. But the thing that made me want to write this book is that those differences are things that we can and should learn from. That perhaps those differences they point to things that we should be importing into our everyday conversations. What are those? One is being very deliberate in our disagreements, right? That they're not just a natural course of the day. In debating, you travel to do it. You set aside time to do it. You set up the room to be able to do it. And we shouldn't do that physically. We don't have to travel to do it, but setting a mental architecture and knowing that this is something you come to rather than it visit upon you, that seemed to me important. Another part of it was that disagreement is a skill, that it's something you can get better at. And of course, it's the case that you should get better at it because you become more wise with age or through study or through reading. But it's also the case that there's a skill to presenting your ideas, to responding, to presenting arguments. And that is separate from sometimes the truth of the arguments that you're making, right? And it was important to me that this is a set of skills that can't be too hard to get started on because it's children, right? It's for children. We started as children. And so you're right that there were those differences, but I started to think of them as a sign that there might be something to learn from in this set of skills and from this community, rather than a reason to view it as distinct or something that's remote.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as you mentioned to me on the phone when we were sort of talking just before this webinar, this session, there are other modes of conversation besides debate. Not every conversation is a debate, hopefully. There's also give and take. There is testimony that you give that you can listen to. There are negotiations. There's just information, questions and answers. Lots of different modes of conversation. But it's interesting to think that debate requires individuals to be very, very good listeners and also extremely precise speakers. And we're going to disentangle what it means to be a precise speaker in a moment. I want to talk a little bit about your history as an extraordinary debater, as a champion debater. And I want to sort of put you, not on the spot, just allow you a moment maybe of being slightly embarrassed to answer a slightly embarrassing question, which is, what do you think your superpower as a debater is? I mean, clearly there is something or things that you're just extraordinary at. And I would love to know, humbly or not so humbly, what you think that thing is that just makes you really, really good at this thing.
I don't need too much help feeling embarrassed. I think it comes down, in my case, to how I came to the activity, right? Which was that I moved from South Korea to Australia without speaking the language. And the reason why I got into debate was my 5th grade teacher promising me that in debate, when one person speaks, no one else does.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that promise that I might be heard not in a spirit of accommodation or friendliness, but in disagreement, that was really important to me. What are the things that marked me out? I think one is I never took for granted the power of language and the power of words. And the reason for that, I think, is because I had to acquire language. And it's still the case, probably and honestly, that English has a kind of majesty or an awesome power in my mind that Korean, which is my native language, does not. And the reason for that is because one, I was born into, and the other I had to learn, right? By hook or by crook, one word in the dictionary at a time. So I think that's one thing. Another is, it's true of debating that many of the most successful debaters tend to be slightly peripheral figures, right? And that's a kind of a generous way of saying where you open the conversation, which they're kind of oddballs. And I think one reason for that is when you're used to being on the margins, you know to read a room before you walk into it. You know to track where a conversation is before you start speaking, right? And that can be a dangerous thing because you can stay on the margins, right? And you never raise your voice at all. But when those people start to speak, it's often worth listening to because it's very much in the fabric of the conversation that's already unfolded, right? And so I don't think, a lot of shortcomings as a debater, as a conversationalist, but I think it's often not the case that I'm coming from somewhere far out that's unrelated to what's come before. So that connection and that practice of listening was one feature of how I approached the activity.
I have to imagine that your answer is surprising to some people. It's certainly surprising to me. In my archetype of what would make an excellent national debater, I was not in debate in high school or in college. I think of like a Boris Johnson style figure. I think of a blustery BSer, someone who is really, really good at jumping into a topic very quickly and establishing the theater of confidence around that subject and making other people in the audience think that they have that kind of confidence and persuasion. And it's so fascinating to talk to someone who is not just my naive idea of a national debate champion saying, no, Derek, it's actually the exact opposite. It's not the ability to necessarily enforce some preconceived notion of confidence upon a room, but rather to read a room and fit it. And I do think it's a theme that comes out from your book, this importance of fitting our words to our meaning and also our expression to our audience. So in keeping with that theme, you have a lovely sort of diagnosis of how how to be precise about what we say, just as seen through the lens of a very specific sentence, which is the sentence is, quote, "We as parents should send our children to the local public school." Now, this is a sentence that could be a debate between a couple, between spouses. We as parents should send our children to the local public school. You can imagine a mother or father or mother and mother discussing this conversation, just having a little, toil about it. Tell me about how you break down a simple sentence like this and see all the nuances in it.
Yeah. And thanks for picking up on that example. On your earlier point, I mean, I should clarify, there are blusterers in debate. Right? And on my worst days, I probably acted on those instincts too, right? And one thing about debate is it does play with fire, right? And the fire is performance, as you say. perception, passions, emotions, all of those things can be dangerous, but you also need fire, right? And I think it's true to how we communicate and persuade one another that that's a part of it. And the places where I've been able to make some progress in debate is not only making my case within a debate, but making the case for my approach to debate, right? Which is when you're debating against a blusterer or a bully, restoring some amount of agreement or alignment on the kind of disagreement that we want to have. And the thing that gives me some amount of hope is that blustering stuff, the stuff that goes viral on the internet, it can be successful on some measures, but it's not filling, right? It's not, there's no nutrition in it. And I think that's a part of the reason why it needs to replicate itself, why it needs to go on top, keep topping itself in terms of its absurdity and extremity. So it's a kind of a style of debate that I'm making the case for. And that starts with, as I said, being very deliberate about setting ourselves up for success in some ways. And that starts by knowing what it is that we're disagreeing about. So in the sentence that you just read out about two parents arguing about whether to send their kids to the local public school, which argument my friends have around the kitchen table, it seems like a straightforward disagreement about what we should do with the kids, right? There are some kids, they have to be educated. Where are we going to send them? But I wanted to say that within that disagreement, there are lots of smaller disagreements, and there are different kinds of disagreements. So embedded within this straightforward prescriptive debate about what we should do may be factual disagreements, right? If the two parents disagree about whether the school has an after-school music program or not, right? That's just a factual disagreement. Or there might be a normative disagreement about what's their obligation as citizens, right? Do they have to be linked into the local public school system, or is your obligation mostly just to do what's right for your kids, right? And that, again, could be a factual disagreement about what are your kids like? What do they need? Yeah. So there are three different types of topics in debate. They are factual disagreements, normative disagreements, prescriptive disagreements. And I think one feature both of competitive rounds and of the disagreements we have every day is that they tend to coexist, right? And they overlap. And being able to name not only what our argument is, but what argument within that is quite central, I think that can be the starting place of getting some purchase on it.
As a writer, I think about this all the time. As a podcaster too, sometimes in my podcast, Plain English, I'll start off by taking a topic like, say, the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, by saying, let's break this down into evidence and interpretation. So first, I'll just list the facts as I see them, without any kind of spin. Like, this is the inflation rate, this is the unemployment rate, this is the observed macroeconomic threat of inflation. I'll list the facts, and then I'll say, okay, now the facts are done, and the rest of this is my interpretation. And I think people enjoy, at least people who listen to the podcast, seem to enjoy the effort to break that apart, because in so much journalism, they're sewn together. You can't figure out, wait, where is this person giving me an opinion, and where are they saying, this is a fact that I observe, and I acknowledge that different people have different interpretations of that fact. So I think that in debate, it was just so interesting to see us from different angles come to the same conclusion, which is that in conversation, whether it's debate, a kitchen table discussion about the future of child rearing, or a economic analysis of Federal Reserve policy, that in all these different modes of conversation, it's really important to remember this distinction. What are we debating? What are we discussing that's just true or false? And then what are we discussing where opinion comes into play, which is beyond the domain of truth and falsehood? I don't know if you wanted to comment.
I like that. I like that so much, Derek. And part of it is being willing to be more incremental, right? And saying, we're going to take this one conversation at a time. We're going to do the fact stuff first, and then we're going to do the interpretation. Now, the place where that becomes a little complicated is that requires patience. It also requires fidelity, like faithfulness to a relationship. And these days, that's in short supply because, so many of if our disagreements were once embedded in communities, in settings where you're going to see the person again and again and again, online, it can be a kind of a one-off thing, right? Same as in journalism, I think, where, it used to be that you develop a relationship with a newspaper or a columnist or a writer, and those things exist to some extent. But nowadays, because people can click around and they can shop around, that sense of being an ongoing conversation with your interlocutor has reduced a lot. And so there's all these pressures to aggregate and to try and do it all in one go, like to hack it. And it usually ends up being the case that you make no progress at all. And so I think that kind of relationship component, we can think about how we do that in the public square, but certainly in our private lives, right? When we know we're going to be with our family members for this long, with our loved one, with our partners for this amount of time, it's worth thinking about arguments being a part of the relationship, and how we do it a day at a time, a conversation at a time.
That's really lovely. And it gives me a new frame for thinking about one of the ways that digital conversation is inherently screwed. It is almost exclusively conversations with people that we assume we won't have to deal with over and over and over again because we have a kind of digital or literal emotional distance from them. So we can be rude to all sorts of people on the internet when we don't think they're going to play a repeated role in our lives. Sometimes I find that I'll write an article, I'll put it on Twitter, someone will say something very mean about it, and then I'll respond in as polite a way as possible, sometimes in a way of trying to purposely disarm them. And their follow-up response tends to be very polite. They're like, oh wait, I might have a multiple point relationship with Derek, and so I can't just be a jerk. I have to talk to him as if I'm talking to someone that I'm going back to and back to and back to. And it's so interesting to think that that simple fact of having multiple touch points with a person changes the way that we talk to them. What a fascinating.
I think it also changes our view of what winning and losing means, right? So one way in which competitive debate is different from the disagreements we have every day is at the end of a competitive round, there's a winner, right? There's an adjudicator who says this person has won. And that's an important distinction. But one of the things that you observe over a career is the World Championships has 500 teams, right? And there's one winner. So you're going to be in the 499 almost all the time. And I was there every time except one time, right? And when you accept that, the wins and the losses, they carry their usual stings and you enjoy it. But I think your attention shifts to the rules by which you're playing the game, right? Which is, we're going to see these people again. We're going to have to exist in some kind of community with them. We know we're going to win sometimes, going to lose sometimes, but are we playing the game by a set of rules that we can endorse, right? And there's no place where that's more important than I think in politics, right? Where we're competing. It's an adversarial system. That's the design, same as in the law. But the knowledge that we're in this together in some deep sense should make us more attentive to what are the rules and the norms that govern our conduct. And we are, I think, sometimes stuck in a feedback loop. Maybe it's because of how we talk to each other on the internet. Maybe it's that society has just gotten big in a way and interconnected in a way that it wasn't before, where we lose sight of the ways in which we are repeat players, whether we acknowledge it or not, right? And the ways in which we stop being repeat players is the game falls apart.
That's interesting. That's very, very well said. Thinking about, I think the game frame is really useful because in debate, winning the argument means winning. As you mentioned, it is a very zero-sum tournament. One winner, 499 losers. But in most interactions in the physical world with a friend, spouse, partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, I sometimes say, if you win a fight, you lose the fight, right? Because you've established a relationship of argumentative domination over the purpose that you want to have, over the person that you want to have comedy with, that you want to have love and affection, friendship with. And so it's interesting that in some games, winning, and in some games, winning is losing. And it's important, I think, for the interlocutor, for the speaker to understand, what game am I playing? Am I playing a game that is designed to win? Or am I playing a game wherein the very act of winning is its own kind of loss?
I like that a lot. And from, thinking like the state, thinking like from the perspective of debate as an activity, what you need from the participants is for them to walk away from any given round thinking, I would do that again. That's all that debate requires, because that's the only way in which it survives, right? And the ways in which debate has, I think, been able to get people to a position where they say yes to that question, I think could be instructive, which is they broaden out the definition of what winning means. So there is this capital W win of you won the round, you progress in the competition. But the skills of debate, the stuff of debate is aimed at what? Making sure you feel as though you had been heard, that your voice had been accounted for in some way, right? That you learned something about the opposing perspective or about what you believe, that there was something progressive, not in a political sense, of your argument in conflict with another had to evolve in some way, right? That you felt that the relationship between you and the other side had gotten richer for the exchange. All of those are wins that we can take away. And I think one way of getting people to engage in disagreements again, and part of my motivation for writing it was not just that we're disagreeing badly, but that many of the most reasonable people are not disagreeing at all because they think it's not worthwhile. In the way that I did as a kid, when I thought, I don't really have the language, I feel quite insecure in my place in here, I'm not going to go through the effort. I wanted to write against that instinct. And I think a part of what might bring people back into the fold is having a sense that in addition to the big prize of persuading the other side, getting your way, that all these other things can be to your advantage too.
Yeah. Last point on this, because it really is unlocking a lot of things for me. There's a journalist that I respect very much who, unlike most liberal journalists that I know, and I'm a liberal journalist, he's very nice to conservatives online. And we've had conversations about this. I'm like, I'm just a sort of pathologically agreeable person. I don't really people. But he's incredibly polite. And I remember asking him, what is your strategy of being this polite to people that you very violently disagree with in a lot of policy issues? And he said, I want to keep open the possibility that I'll be able to speak to them later if I need to learn about the campaign that they're working for, the think tank that they're working for, the policy proposal that they're putting out. I want to make sure that I'm not closing the door on these relationships that might be valuable in the future. And another way of saying that, in your words or in your framework, is he imagines himself as a repeat player.
Yeah.
Right? Not as a drive-by insult comic saying, bing, got you, bing, got you, got you, and I never have to deal with any of you people again. He says, no, in all of my exchanges with people, I'm a repeat player. And so I need to engage with people as a repeat player. And that requires a certain amount of listening and sincerity and good faith and precision with words, rather than focusing on the kind of, caps lock destroys mode of interacting.
The last thing I'll just say about that, Derek, and I really like that, is framing it as a game also helps localize it a little bit, right? Which is, you what do we do with games? We play them sometimes, but then the game finishes and then we do something else, right? And I think this is a point children understand instinctively about debate, which is, I was at the Boston Urban Debate League the other week, and people have these disagreements. And after it ends on the bus home or in the corridor outside, one of the kids would say, "Oh, that's a good point you made." Right? And for me, that just signaled it wasn't a concession that they had lost the debate or that the other side was completely right, but it did show a willingness to look at the debate from some objective distance, right? That it's a game that we played, it's an important thing, but it's not the whole of what we do. So my aim in the book is not to make people into debaters, it's to allow them to say, I debated or I can debate. And that sense that it's one of the languages of disagreement that we speak, as you said earlier in the conversation, that it's a game that we engage in, that we get something out of, but that we allow to end, that we can see its boundaries. I think that's an important part of the perspective too.
Yeah, in this sense, it's a little bit like meditation, in that people that are teaching meditation don't assume that their readers are going to spend their entire waking life sitting and thinking about their breath. No, that's not the point of meditation. The point of meditation is to have a bounded activity in which you pay very close attention to all sorts of bodily sensations and appearances and consciousness that can inform the life that you live outside that bounded meditation. And you're looking at debate, it seems like in a similar way. You're saying, if you understand very cleanly the rules of this game, not only can it be really fun, and you can have a lot of fun playing that game and think about how to be a good argumentarian and how to phrase and wield argument, but also the activity will have all these spillover effects into your life as you enter these other modes of talking, negotiation, testimony giving, listening, that draw on some of those skills. I think it's a really, the book does that very, very well. On the issue of, because I want some listeners to at least feel like they're coming away with some specific skills for how to play this game, even if it is bounded. You have a lovely, another lovely framework, which is the what, why, when, who cares framework, which is frankly very similar to how sometimes I like to structure some of my articles. So talk a little bit about the what, why, when, who cares framework.
Yeah. So this comes from one of the essential insights of debate, I think, which is that an argument is not just a random grab bag of thoughts or a repetition of your position. It is a structured tool that we have, and it's a tool of persuasion, right? And the experience of debate says there are two things that an argument must do. It must show that its main claim is true and that it's important. So if you're arguing that we should become vegetarian because the process by which we get meat is cruel to animals, you have to show first that it is in fact cruel. And second, the fact that it's cruel means that we should become vegetarian, right? That's the importance part of the argument. And the way in which I try to make that as practical as I could for the reader is to say every argument should answer at least 4 questions. The first is, what is the point that you're making, right? Why is it true? When has it happened before? Is there an example or a case study that's going to illustrate the point? And then who cares, right? So why does it matter? And I think that sense of anticipating the questions that you're likely to get is a way in which you let another person into your argument, right? So that it's not just the projection of your certainty, but you're giving people a way in. And for me, the project of persuasion started that way, of doing the working.
Yeah, and it's very interesting again to go back to the repeat player framework, which I'm going to steal, borrow,
please.
One reason why it's useful to anticipate your interlocutor's response is that you understand you're in a repeat player game.
Mhm.
Right? If you're just in a one-off engagement, then you can say whatever glib thing you want, and then you're gone. But if you understand that you're in a dialogue, then it behooves you to not only make a case, but also subtly anticipate the responses of the other person and say, now I know you're going to say, when has this happened before? Let me tell you. Now I know you're going to say, why does this matter globally? Well, I'm going to tell you. And so it's nice that this framework lives inside of that previous point that you made.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that the framework does is it makes legible your thinking, right? And it almost puts your ideas up for consumption and checks and questioning. And there's a certain vulnerability that comes with that. Because you could be wrong, because you might not have thought through it in a deep way. And I think a conversation where we're just repeating cultural memes that have some coded value, or we're repeating slogans that some number of people are guaranteed to agree with you on and that they're likely to say it in response. There's a defensiveness to that, I think, and a shielding of the self and of your thinking. And that can be fine, fine in some settings, but for there to be genuine connection in disagreement, and I think disagreement is a powerful forum and vehicle for connection. You need to be willing to let the other side in.
That's great. I'm going to hand some of the balance of time to our meta moderator. And why don't we answer some of these questions that have come up from the audience?
Sure. So first, thank you so much for this, yeah, I don't know, lovely, sane, reasonable conversation. I was taking all these notes and thinking, oh, this is about debate. What's this? Anyway, thank you. This was just really edifying to have it early in the day. So our first question is from Rishur Nihil, who asks, can formal training in logic help in debating or in everyday conversational interaction, with the examples of formal logic emphasizing thinking about correct reasoning and what is a convincing proof and so on?
Yeah, and I should say it's an amazing opportunity to have Derek on the line. So if people have questions to him and about anything we spoke about or about his work, please feel free to use the time for that. In the research for my book, I did read a lot about logic, and I studied it a little bit in college. I think there's obviously a great deal of merit to the work and a lot that we can learn from it. I personally found it hard. And I found, and I was fully persuaded that on some of the most important questions, we should apply that level of scrutiny to it and try and make sure the premises line up and so on. But the essential subject of this book is conversation. All right. So it's conversation with others. I wanted it to fit into the tempo and the rhythm of everyday life. And for that, I think there are things that logic doesn't account for. That's emotions, right? That's the feeling that you get of being in conversation with another person. And I also wanted a set of tools that are just more accessible and more applicable to how we talk to one another, reason through things, and persuade. So I'm sure there's a great deal of merit to the work, but I was going for things that are slightly different, I think.
Yeah, I dimly recall taking logic in college, and it was fascinating and very difficult.
It's kind of like math. Yeah.
Very much. Very like. We have a question from Susan Littman, who asks, is there a politician who exemplifies this informed way of understanding human interaction?
I'm sure there are some, but one thing I'll say is the pressures of politics, right? Of the argument being so public facing, of not only engaging in the disagreement that's unfolding, but having to get out your message on top of that to cut through. I think that's severely limiting. The instances that I found most instructive, that gave me the most amount of hope, are the disagreements that people have with people they know in ordinary settings, especially when they feel some distance from public conversation, right? When people think, wow, this is really just the living room, or wow, this is really just the kitchen. And actually even that space is shrinking these days. Because, I think somewhere in the back of our minds, like, we impose the rules and norms of social media onto even face-to-face interaction. So I think that room is shrinking, but those are the parts that I would go to for an example.
And actually, this Rishir has a follow-up that I think maybe sort of ties into this idea about having an audience. And in a debate, do you focus only on the arguments, or do you also calibrate for the audience or for the judges for different biases that whomever your presumed audiences might have?
Yeah, so this is another important disanalogy, I think, between debate and normal disagreements, is there is a kind of a third party, right? But the thing that makes it work, I think, is the third party is asked to set aside their own substantive positions, right? To come at the debate with paper and pen, to write down everything each side is saying, and to answer the question, who won the debate, right? So the question is not, importantly, who's right, right? Or which policy should we enact? Should we send the kids to the local public school or not? It was, who won this debate? And I think that separation creates risks and creates dangers, or that being persuasive is not always the same as being right. But it also counsels us to be more humble than we otherwise would be, right? To say you can be right, but unpersuasive on the day. And it brings into sharper relief the fact that this is a skill we're talking about.
And we have a question from an anonymous attendee who asks, did you discover anything about yourself while writing the book?
I think one thing I discovered was, I thought it was a kind of an accident that I had found my voice in debate, right? That there were other ways in which I could have done it. It just happened that debate was what I stumbled in. Now the more I think about disagreement, what it is, what it can be, the more I think it is true to our experience of life and what it means to be a person, which is you are in conflict with the world around you, with other people around you. And it's one of our tasks is to make those differences work for us and not against us, right? And for your voice and for your participation to be meaningful, it feels more natural to me than it once did that that's going to involve some amount of conflict. That it's going to involve some amount of conflict. I think that's one part of it. Another, just as and Derek was talking about this earlier, is I think when you're an author, you're writing it, the four corners of your world are like the four corners of the Google Doc on which you write the book. So it feels like the whole world, right? And now that it's been printed, it takes up not that much room, And you sort of think, and you see the limits of the intervention a lot more, I think. You think, debate is one language of disagreement that we need. It's an important one. That's my sincere belief. But it's not the only thing we need. And I think seeing the boundaries of the argument, that's the thing I'm most recently learning and grappling with.
And we have a follow-up question from Susan Lippman asking, what is the most important thing we should take away from these public interactions into our private conversations? How you were talking about how even sort of the living room is sort of, even that kind of more private space is sort of becoming increasingly public.
Yeah. So I think, to be clear, there's a lot that we should not import, right? That was a part of what I was suggesting. In terms of positive things to bring in, I think one part of it is we have this idea, especially in romantic situations, familial situations, that things should just be very natural, right? And that any attempt to give something a structure or a design is not in the spirit of the relationship, right? So for us to have that kind of disagreement about, is this a prescriptive debate, a normative debate, a factual debate, is a pretty unromantic thing to say.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't say it in a romantic setting. But I think actually that element of being careful, right, and deliberate, especially in our most important relationships, I think can be useful. So that setting the stage, which we take as quite natural in public settings, I think can benefit private conversations too.
And Rishur has a question that actually was sort of dovetails into something I was thinking about. So the way he phrased it is, how do you deal with a debate opponent who naively or deliberately uses false information? And that was part of, in general, I was wondering during your conversation, just how do you address a bad faith argument in real time?
It's a deep question and a hard question. In one of the chapters in the book is specifically about bad faith debaters, and I try and go through the common tactics that bad faith debaters use and how you might be able to respond. On the question of falsehood specifically, it usually is the case that liars lie a lot rather than just slip in one lie, right? And one of the prescriptions is to pick out a representative lie, right? And to show how it doesn't fit, right? And one advantage of the truth over lies is that things tend to line up, right? And instead to supply the truth and show how it might fit better, right? Now, that's a takeaway that I think can be useful in some settings, but it's limited. And it's limited in two ways. One is the other person might not accept that it not lining up is a problem if we have different understandings of what truth and falsehood is, right? So there may be a period of negotiation or discussion before we enter into a disagreement about what we're going to accept as truth, what we're going to accept as the standard for truth. And again, I think when we get into disagreements, we often think we have to disagree the whole time. And I think that's not right? We can slip out of the disagreement for a second and just say, hey, are we disagreeing about the same thing still? Or, hey, what are the standards that we're using to define what truth is, what falsehood is? And that, talking about touch points again, of viewing each other not just as adversaries or adversaries in a narrow sense, but collaborators in another, right? You're creating a conversation together. You're spending this time together, at least. Being able to slip out of that mode, I think, is useful. And the last bit I'll add is the way in which that question about falsehood becomes very threatening at the moment is when falsehoods become constitutive of entire worldviews,
Mhm.
right? That contact with reality and seeing whether things line up or not, that becomes harder,
Yeah.
right? And I think probably if you, in addition to applying some of the lessons of the book in our everyday lives, I think if you were to build a program around it, one important part of that would be starting with young people and a population where we teach people to differentiate between good arguments from bad ones, to demand evidence of the sort Derek was talking about earlier with in journalism. That's a population with some immunity against the abuses that we're seeing in our public arguments today.
Mhm.
So that's a long answer and an incomplete one, but those are some of the pieces, I think.
Yeah, thank you. That actually, I think this will be our closing question. If it's sort of a follow-up really to what you just said, just minor, asking what role do you think higher education should play in cultivating these skills and learning how to disagree productively, or how do you think that should be integrated into formal education, or maybe younger than higher education, or what have you?
Yeah, I do think it should be folded in at a younger point than higher education. I think it should be accessible to all people as part of a public education.
Mhm.
And one complication I'm dealing with, I'm a resident tutor for undergraduates at Harvard, is thinking about, it's all good to say there should be free debate and lots of intellectual exchanges. I believe that. How does it change things, if any, that a college is a residential setting too, right? And what does that mean, right?
Right.
And I think that's a rich question, and people disagree about it, and I think that would be one thing that you would have to think about as part of it. But I do think a complete civic education has to have as a very important tenet teaching people to be able to disagree better with their fellow citizens.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you because so many people are talking about that right now. Just this
Yeah, for
notion of
sure. And I think,
debating and
I
on
think
campus, but right. People are living there. Thank you.
I think one component of an answer might be that we have to think as much about not just about the right to speak and to disagree, but the responsibility to do it well. And when you embrace that responsibility, it starts to demand a lot of you, right? It requires work, it requires patience, it requires the commitment to the relationship that we were talking about earlier. So I think that shift to the responsibility part will be an important move to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much to
Thanks.
both of you.
Derek, did you want to add anything, or?
Yeah.
No, I thought those
Yeah.
were fantastic answers. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a wonderful conversation, Derek. Thanks. So it really went somewhere, I feel
Yes,
like.
I agree.
Which is a real treat.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much again, Derek Thompson, BOSO, for being here, and thanks to all of you joining us on your lunch hour this afternoon. I've posted a link to learn more about and to purchase copies of Good Arguments, and go take a look, support your independent bookstores, and you can do so by getting this specific book. So thank you so much, and have a lovely weekend. And thanks again so much to both of you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.